On the 4 candidates for the Commission on a roll call vote, which is open.
Haben alle Kolleginnen und Kollegen?
Have all members voted? Yes, then the vote is closed.
Mit Ja haben gestimmt
421 in favour, 170 against with 32 abstentions, so those 4 commissioners are appointed. Next in the House's order of business comes the Commission statement on youth employment, and Commissioner Andor has the floor.
Hogy várjunk egy kicsit, amíg kimegy a borda. Ne bejelentett.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. Could I ask you, those who are staying for the debate, we would like to begin, and those who wish to leave the chamber to please do so immediately. I'm going to begin this part of the agenda with some announcements. So could I ask? Please, colleagues, could you clear the chamber quietly? Thank you. I'll begin with announcements, colleagues. The competent Spanish authorities have informed me of the election of Mr. Javier Couso Permiu to replace Mr. Willy Meyer as of July the 15th, 2014. Please, could I have some quiet? Colleagues, could I just say that you have had a very experienced president in the chair in the first part of the session. You now have a very inexperienced person in the chair, and I would ask for some leniency for my inexperience, but I intend to be quite tough. So I am going to continue and ask for your attention. One last time, I see some colleagues still speaking. Please. I'll continue. Pursuant to Article 7, Paragraph 1 of the Act concerning the election of members of the European Parliament by direct universal suffrage, and Rule 4, Paragraphs 1 and 4, Parliament notes the election of Mr. Javier Couso Permiu as of the 15th of July 2014. I welcome our new colleague and point out that pursuant to Rule 3, Paragraph 2, until such time as his credentials have been verified and a ruling given on any dispute, he may take his seat in Parliament and on its bodies and enjoy all the rights attaching thereto, provided that he has made the declaration that he does not hold any office incompatible with that of a member of the European Parliament. I also wish to advise the Chamber that I have received from the EPP Group requests for modifications of membership to committees. The list of these requests will be published in the minutes of this sitting. Unless objections are raised before the approval of the minutes, the modifications will be deemed to have been approved. Those are the announcements. We can now begin this morning's debate. And again, could I please ask colleagues, we are beginning a debate on a very important subject, and I would ask you to give your full attention, please, The next item on the agenda is a Commission statement on youth unemployment, and I give the floor to Commissioner Andor. Thank you.
President, honourable members, in his inaugural address 2 weeks ago in Strasbourg, the President of the European Parliament outlined to this Assembly what he sees as the major challenges facing Europe. The first one he mentioned was the shocking level of youth unemployment, which is a source of desperation and hopelessness that constitutes a threat to our democracy. Those are very strong words. As we all know, they are perfectly warranted. Mainly, but not exclusively, the countries and regions of the Eurozone periphery have been affected by a dramatic rise of youth unemployment in the recent years. The Commission has been adamant on keeping youth unemployment on the top of the EU agenda and launched an unprecedented range of measures combining policy and financial support. I would like to thank the European Parliament for its support both in terms of bringing about the Youth Guarantee and ensuring adequate resources from the European Union budget. Under the Youth Guarantee, all Member States have committed themselves to ensuring that all young people under 25 receive a good quality offer of employment, continued education, an apprenticeship or traineeship within 4 months of leaving formal education or becoming unemployed. The Youth Guarantee is a major structural reform as well as a key social investment. In order to support the implementation of the Youth Guarantee, the Commission launched a European Alliance for Apprenticeships and put forward a quality framework for traineeships. All 28 Member States have now submitted Youth Guarantee implementation plans as requested by the European Council. I welcome the efforts made by the Member States to put in place the Youth Guarantee schemes. I recognise that this is not an easy task, as this requires strategic reforms. The Commission has assessed the national Youth Guarantee implementation plans as part of the 2014 European semester. The analysis shows that progress has been made across the board. However, there are a number of challenges, including strengthening the capacity of the public employment services, providing quality offers, reforming education and training systems, and reaching out to inactive young people. Altogether, 18 Member States received country-specific recommendations focusing on one or several of these points I have just mentioned. A total of 8 Member States were invited to act more decisively to implement the Youth Guarantee. Making the Youth Guarantee happen requires that all available resources are there to get started as quickly as possible and achieve concrete results already in the short term. The European Social Fund, with more than €10 billion every year in the 2014-20 period, is the most significant resource of funding to implement the Youth Guarantee. In addition, the European Council agreed to launch a youth employment initiative targeting young people aged between 15 and 24, not in employment, education or training, the so-called NEETs, who live in the regions most affected by youth unemployment. This is a dedicated financial tool worth €6.4 billion, which directly targets individuals and supports the implementation of the Youth Guarantee schemes. The initiative should focus on job-creating measures, including well-targeted wage subsidies and recruitment subsidies, apprenticeships and traineeships. It can also support activation measures, such as job search guidance and assistance, as well as further training. Parliament and Council agreed to front-load the Youth Employment Initiative resources, so the €6.4 billion are committed in 2014 and 2015, rather than over the entire period between 2014 to 2020. They also agreed to allow Member States to claim related expenditure from September 1, 2013. This means that the Commission can reimburse the Member States once the relevant operational programmes are adopted. In addition, when a Member State chooses to programme the Youth Employment Initiative under a dedicated operational programme, the Commission can approve it before the adoption of the partnership agreement, thereby speeding up implementation. Where do we stand now? France and Italy have presented such dedicated operational programmes. The Commission approved them respectively in June and July. As a result, 1.5 billion, or a quarter of the total allocation, have already been committed. In addition, 11 out of the 20 eligible Member States have officially submitted operational programmes covering the Youth Employment Initiative related actions. 7 Member States have not yet done so. Last Friday, the Commission organised a seminar to support Member States in accelerating the programming and practical implementation of the Youth Employment Initiative. On this occasion, the Commission clarified outstanding issues regarding the programming of the Youth Employment Initiative and had bilateral technical meetings with the Member States. Following the seminar, I am sending a letter to Ministers encouraging them to ensure swift completion of the Youth Employment Initiative programming. Honourable Members, the Youth Employment Initiative, together with the Youth Guarantee, should be a reality on the ground as a matter of urgency. We cannot afford to delay the implementation of such a crucial initiative. The Commission encourages Member States to continue their efforts to ensure swift implementation of the Youth Employment Initiative. The Commission will continue to assist them in this endeavour. And at the same time, we also have to continue developing the macroeconomic framework in order to ensure that fiscal and monetary policies become more supportive for growth and job creation in all countries and all regions of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, I now open the speakers list and give the floor to Mr. CASA, please.
Grazie, signora Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, the situation is not a positive one in the EU. In March this year, over 5,300,000 persons under 25 years of age were unemployed in the EU. 7.5 million Europeans between the ages of 15 and 24 are not employed and are not in education or training. The situation is such that young persons of varying levels of education are finding it very difficult to find employment. In the medium to long term, we need to understand that in order to have more persons in employment, we need to have more employers, and therefore we need to implement measures that find more employers, because this is the only way to create new jobs. We need to create a culture that is friendly to SMEs, in which these organizations can thrive and grow. But the gravity of the situation also warrants the use of more direct assistance. And we should welcome important tools such as the Youth Guarantee Scheme, but such initiatives should be adequately funded. And even more importantly, allocated funds must be spent wisely. Mr. Commissioner, at the moment we are trying to work together between the parties to find consensus which reflects all the different ideas of our parties. Yesterday we seemed to make progress. Now we need to make the last push to help you reach your aims. Let us combat unemployment among our young people once and for all, because this does not favour our citizens. I would like to thank all the group coordinators for their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CASA. I give the floor now to Madam Rodrigues.
Good morning. I'm a former Minister of Labour and now Vice President of S&D Group on social and economic issues. I'm coming with a very difficult question for the European Commission, but first of all let me greet Commissioner László Andor, because you have made a great deal in a very difficult situation. You fought for job creation, you fought for social investment. This is the right investment to be done in Europe, to invest in people. And lastly, you launched this youth guarantee. Now, the situation is the following. in spite of many efforts, the unemployment rate remains very high in Europe, and particularly the youth unemployment rate. And beyond that, we have divergences, economic and social divergences, between regions and between member states we never had. So something is deeply wrong in Europe. I don't believe there is a future for Europe if there is not a future for young people in Europe. And so this means that we need to have a much higher ambition on tackling this problem. And my question, therefore, is very simple. According to your experience, according to what was done so far, which are the stronger instruments we should have in the European Union to really tackle and reduce youth unemployment and to really stop these economic and social divergences? These divergences are undermining our European ambition, our European project, our European cohesion. We are losing the win-win game we should have in Europe. So my question for you, Commissioner, is what is your idea about that? What is the stronger instrument we should be built together really to come with a convincing response to our citizens?
Thank you, Madam Rodriguez. Could I ask speakers, it is an important subject and your question an important one, but to respect speaking time where absolutely we have a long list of speakers, and I now give the floor for 2 minutes to Mrs. McIntyre. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and may I take the opportunity to welcome you to the chair and encourage you to keep people to speaking times. I will try to do my best. I'm really pleased that our first proper session of this Parliament is concentrating on this really important issue of youth unemployment, or youth employment, if you want to be positive. And thank you, Commissioner Andor, for your words. It is indeed encouraging that Mr. Juncker has put job creation as his top priority. But we have to recognise that it's not the Commission that creates jobs. It's not the Parliament that creates jobs. It's not even the Member States' governments that create jobs. It is businesses that create jobs. SMEs create 85% of new jobs across Europe. So our job must be to create an environment where businesses can grow and can create jobs. And businesses will only create more jobs and recruit more people if the economic environment encourages growth, if they can rely on a qualified workforce, if labour markets are sufficiently flexible, if labour costs, including wages, are in line with productivity, if social protection systems make work more attractive, and if regulation is proportionate and evidence-based. We've seen a trend towards more skill-intensive jobs. Almost 90% of the jobs expected to be created and become vacant by 2020 require medium or high qualifications. And Europe's education and training systems are not adapted to the business skills needs that we need in the future years. We need a better supply of science, technology, engineering and maths skills, the STEM subjects, and those are currently not going to match the increasing demands of business. There are encouraging signs and companies are bringing jobs back. We just have to encourage them.
Thank you, Mrs. McIntyre. You did encourage me to keep to the speaking time, so I will do that. Could I now give the floor to Mrs. Harkin for 2 minutes? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and I too would like to welcome my colleague Mrs. McGuinness to the Chair. I wish you well. Before the election, youth unemployment was the biggest issue for many groups, and unfortunately it still is. With 7.5 million young Europeans between the ages of 15 and 24 not in employment, education or training, and 6.8 million in the same situation between the ages of 25 and 30. At European level, we have a number of instruments. We have the Youth Guarantee, we have the Social Fund, we have the Youth Employment Initiative, the Quality Framework for Traineeships, the European Alliance for Apprenticeships, and of course the Programme for Employment and Social Innovation. I suppose in many ways it's too early to really assess the progress made by most of these instruments, for example the Youth Guarantee or the Youth Employment Initiative, but I think it would be fair to say that so far progress is slow and uneven. And in this context I think we need a renewed effort from the Commission to encourage Member States to immediately set about the implementation of the Youth Guarantee. I mean, after all, this is supposed to be a flagship project for the European Union policy, and if we're really serious about its implementation, we need to take action. Obviously, I believe youth unemployment needs to be a specific objective within the European semester, and also measures to combat youth unemployment. I'm happy that it is included in the country-specific recommendations and the national reform projects, and that must remain a priority. Also, I believe that the Youth Guarantee should be extended to young people under 30. However, we also have to deal with the supply side as well as the demand side, and in this context we need to ensure easier access to financing and simpler rules for setting up new businesses. However, in many countries like my own, Ireland, many SMEs are already overburdened with debt. It's not simply a question of easier access to finance. Small businesses don't want to take on new borrowings, and there is a problem with adequate working capital, so they're caught in a bind. Some mechanisms have to be found to deal with the overhang of debt, otherwise many SMEs will struggle and are doomed to fail.
Thank you, Madam Harkin, and thank you for your kind remarks. I now give the floor to Madam Zuber for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam President. How long have we been here talking and hearing promises and commiseration about a problem that is leaving a whole generation of young people without any possibility of planning their lives properly? What's changed recently? Well, little or nothing. 23% of young people are unemployed in the European Union, and in some countries more than half of them, like Greece or Spain. In some countries, like my own, there's now an attempt to manipulate the statistics, because a slight decrease in the figure is also, of course, due to emigration, or to the number of young people who are forced to leave their country, which is bringing us back to the equivalent period of poverty several centuries ago, or when we were living under fascism. Jobs created are still very precarious jobs, and they often replace jobs with rights. Now what we need to know is the following. This youth guarantee system, how is it different from all the previous schemes? The occupational schemes, the training periods, which offered no prospect for the future, and they've existed for several years. How is this program different from the others that we've already had? If we really want to get rid of precarious labour, which is one of the things that are going to undermine the present and future of these young workers, we need to hear from the Commission, please, why the recent recommendations of the European semester impose on a number of countries, including my own, reductions of wages and simplification of collective bargaining. In other words, getting rid of collective bargaining, which is one of the fundamental labour rights. We need a clear answer to that, please.
Thank you very much, and I now give the floor to Madam Reintke for 3 minutes.
Liebe Kolleginnen,
Colleagues, President, in the run-up to the elections we heard a great deal about everything that needed to be done to tackle the problem of youth unemployment in the European Union. My group, over the coming parliamentary term, will emphasize this issue and make it one of our priorities. It's because millions of people are losing hope for a future, but that's not the only thing. The society and the fabric of society in the European Union is falling apart because of this. For years now there's been an austerity policy
that people have been subjected to, and we're being told that these policies are necessary in order to improve the conditions for business. But the terminology we use is wrong in itself. Can we really talk about making savings when, according to a Eurofund study, every year 153 million the loss, according to resulting from these savings policies? This money, this loss, will not be sufficient to tackle the serious and dramatic problem of youth unemployment. This is why, amongst other things, we want put an end to this blind, short-sighted austerity or savings policy which is damaging the labour market, and instead invest in the future of young people. We want an implementation of the youth guarantee at the European level as proposed in the joint resolution, and we have a number of other proposals and demands that are set out in the joint resolution, and we want to ensure that we follow our words with deeds at long last. So the whole question of whether or not we can effectively deal with youth unemployment, well, on this hinges the future of an entire generation. If we are successful in showing solidarity and tackling this problem, it will set a foundation for a solid and long-lasting European Union. So we must find a solution to this problem now to give young people a future in the European Union, and we hope that the European Commission will be on our side in this struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to Madam AGEA for 2.5 minutes, please.
Grazie Presidente.
Thank you, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, without too many words, in this question of fighting against unemployment, from 2008 until today, the cohesion policies adopted by the European Union have missed their target. They've missed in the Mediterranean countries, and they've missed in Italy. More than 25 million of men and women in Europe are without a job. 3 million of them in Italy. 43% of those are young people. Young people who just last Saturday in Terni met and who are at risk of losing jobs because of layoffs at the steel plant in Terni. The cry of despair of millions of young Europeans needs to be heard loudly in this chamber. Structural funds haven't given the expected results. Geographical and professional mobility remains a fantasy. The only reality is that millions of people are being forced into despair. Resources for local policies are inadequate. The resources need to reach companies, need to reach the productive fabric, need to reach the real economy. We have to cut the job culture that makes precarious jobs an absolute value. Yeah. There are accountants driving policy who simply want to get the accounts working right. The Troika has imposed austerity. And there are even people who justify this by saying that Europe wasn't ready for this crisis, but after 6 years that's not credible anymore. We weren't ready, we didn't have the right instruments. Those are excuses which nobody believes anymore. In the meanwhile, we have deflation, we have unemployment. And the deflation is a virus. Let's fight it all together. Let's start again with investments, with productive investments, and exclude them from the 3% annual deficit calculation. Let's change the monetary policy so that the countries that need it get liquidity. Let's accelerate into development with new hope for the future for the 500 million citizens who are not just a number on the front of this building, but men and women who for 6 years now have been calling for help without achieving any response. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. ZARIANOPOULOS for 1 minute. Thank you.
President, well, the right-wing governments of our Europe are worried about unemployment among young people, but they're totally hypocritical. The programs to combat unemployment do nothing for the unemployment of young people. That doesn't seem to be the real goal. This funding is a funding of monopolies. It goes toward companies who benefit from work and lower wages, and we see that the precarity of jobs is becoming general, this so-called flexibility, and all of the training of young people are suffering, even though different initiatives have been taken. We see these monopolies becoming stronger and stronger and gaining ground everywhere, because what these monopolies want in terms of trade is to have the cheapest labor possible. And that's what makes it possible for them to keep acting in this way. And now we realize that this trend, we're starting to see it everywhere.
I give the floor to our next speaker for 2 minutes, Madame Lope Fonte.
Gracias. Thank you, President. Commissioner. Well, we're starting a new mandate, and I see that youth unemployment is the first thing on our agenda, which is very good, which shows the commitment of this Parliament with one of the greatest concerns that we're seeing across Europe. The crisis has taught us that we can't go back to the productive model that we had 10 years ago, but we have to reinvent things. And to do that, we have to start working with education, bringing it into line with job needs and basing it in sectors with a great margin for growth and creation of jobs. To promote youth employment is linked to supporting SMEs and the self-employed, who create the most jobs in Europe. And to achieve this, we have to create a favorable environment for their establishment and growth. We have to reduce administrative obstacles and facilitate the granting of credit. In the EU, there are about 2 million jobs which are vacant, which could be filled if we eliminated all the obstacles to mobility and if there were better coordination of public employment services. The last legislature, as you realize, Commissioner, approved the youth guarantee schemes and the Youth Employment Initiative, but so that our young people really have job opportunities that correspond to their qualifications, we have to act before the problems appear. And therefore, I'd like to ask you, Commissioner, if we can expect a real youth employment scheme in the long term, endowed with the necessary funds to achieve its ends. And secondly, I'd like to ask you if there is any proposal intended to favor the entry onto the labor market of the young people who, like migrants and the handicapped or the Roma, have greater difficulties in finding a job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor for 2 minutes to Mrs. Steinruck.
The ever higher youth unemployment rate is a scandal, and we Social Democrats have for years been calling for stronger action and specific action which actually produces an effect, including investment in growth, creation of youth jobs and youth guarantee. What has been done so far is too little. Fighting against youth unemployment must be the #1 priority for everybody, for us here in Parliament, for the Commission, and for the Commission. And this passing the parcel backwards and forwards gets us nowhere. The €6 billion for the youth guarantee is too little. The Member States must be supported in implementation and in calling the money out. We need to look at what is actually being done, what's really being done to fight youth unemployment. We must see what really produces an effect, and we need specific suggestions about how to carry on when the money runs out. We need to make sure that after 2016 further money is available, and we need more European solidarity in the case of co-financing, for example, and we Social Democrats also want to see standards for the implementation of the Youth Guarantee, compulsory targets for fighting youth unemployment in the framework of the European semester, and we also want European minimum standards for good jobs, for good apprentice posts, and for good training posts. Wage dumping and social dumping is not the solution, and I call on everybody, not just the media, to stick to this subject. We need a new summit. We need to be at least as ambitious as we are when it comes to rescuing banks.
And indeed for respecting your speaking time. Could I now give the floor for 1.5 minutes to Mrs. Tomašić, please.
Hvala lijepa. Thank you. The unemployment rate of youth in the European Union is still too high. I'm glad that this Parliament recognizes this problem and sees that it requires a very serious approach. Unfortunately, we have not yet reached a consensus about effective measures which would be useful for all member states. I think we're going in the wrong direction, trying to find a universal solution without taking into account the specific characteristics of each member state. From the perspective of the poorer member states, this is the wrong solution. Some member states have many unemployed young people, while others are looking for workers. Germany, for example, might employ young people from the poorer states, but this is not good for the poorer states. If we want a sustainable economy, we have to approach the problem at the level of each member state. We have to link the educational system with the business sector so that the young on graduating can meet the needs of the labor market. Also encouraging the entrepreneurial spirit among young people and making it easier to open up small SMEs is a good solution. Many young people cannot find the means to survive in their own country among their own families and friends. We have to make it possible for them. Thank you.
Thank you. For 1.5 minutes now, I give the floor to, for 1 minute, let me clarify that, to Mrs. BECERRA, please. 1 minute. Thank you.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, the future of Europe is it's 192 million young people. Yesterday, in his speech, the President of the Commission said that he wanted to raise the age limit for mechanisms such as the Youth Guarantee from the current 25 year age limit to 30, because currently thousands of young people are excluded from these measures. We want to ensure that youth policies are linked to the creation of quality traineeships and quality jobs. We request that you urge the member states to establish clear tools such as the EURES network in order to make it possible to use EU funds in the best possible way. Commissioner, we cannot allow a single euro or a single minute to be wasted when it comes to tackling this terrible problem of youth unemployment which plagues the European Union at the present time. Thank you.
And we would ask for respect for speaking time. I give the floor for 1.5 minutes to Mrs. Kari.
Thank you, President. Well, a lot of good things have been said today about youth unemployment, and thank you for that. But, dear colleagues, That's not enough. First of all, we're going to have to be honest. The youth guarantee as it looks today has been a fiasco. Secondly, there is a serious risk that it's going to be misused to reduce working conditions and to create cheap labor. And thirdly, it doesn't grapple with the basic problem that is the policy of austerity in the EU, which creates even more unemployment among people. The EU austerity policy means the firing of public servants and higher pensionable ages, and this helps create even more young people unemployed. And of course, this is all the reason that we suggest a radical change in EU policy. We demand that the austerity policy stop, and at the same time we have to acknowledge that the labour markets are extremely different in the different countries. And the solution is to give the member states the possibility of finding a solution themselves without having one single solution. It has to be possible to have public investments in, for example, in the education and health sectors, because that can create jobs. And it has to be possible to reprioritize jobs so that some people can take early retirement and other people can work. We have to acknowledge that our old methods are wrong. We have to dare do something new. Let's start doing something new today. Thank you.
And thank you. Next, give the floor to Mrs. Delli for 2 minutes, please.
Mes chers collègues,
Colleagues, on the 11th of July last, when a debate was supposed to be held on the key issue of youth unemployment, well, that summit was cancelled. So there you go. That's the kind of priority that this issue is. Despite all the intentions that were declared during the electoral campaign, when it comes to real policy for young people, it's shameful. Everything's behind schedule and it's too little too late. How long do we have to wait? Do you want to wait for young people to leave en masse, to leave Europe because there are no opportunities at home? Listen, young people are going through devastating times. They are waiting for a long time between jobs, and that time is filled with unpaid work placements. And it is their lives that are being ruined by this. It causes worry and despair, not just for the young people concerned, but their families as well. They are the real victims, who are hardest hit by austerity policies and the crisis. Is it acceptable for 30% of young people under the age of 25 to be surviving under the poverty line? We should all denounce this reality. Everyone is talking about debt. You all talk about debt. I want to talk in different terms. I want to talk about investment. Investment in education, investment in training, and investment in the common good, because these people are the future of Europe. These people are calling on you, the new Commission, to guarantee their rights to housing, to work, dignified work. Let's make this youth guarantee a reality, and let's be ambitious and...
I would like to ask my colleague to please stop.
It's high time we reconcile. We reconcile
Thank you.
Europe with its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speech will be by Madam Arnott.
It seems to me that many members of this place have forgotten that they claim to believe in the principle of subsidiarity. They've forgotten that decisions should be taken at the level closest to the citizen. The challenges facing each of the member states are varied and different. In my constituency, in the northeast of England, almost 1 in 4 young people are unemployed. We've got the highest levels of youth unemployment in the UK. Our manufacturing industry, which was once the powerhouse of the region, has been decimated. And it's European Union legislation which is preventing us from being competitive once more. Competitiveness is what drives economies forward. It's what's needed to prevent jobs going overseas. In the UK, we need to learn from other countries, we need to learn from Germany, that there should be no stigma attached to manual jobs. We need to learn that young people should take and be taught to take as much pride from vocational as academic routes. And most of all, we need an education system that reflects the needs of industry and a 21st century society. The free movement of workers, which means uncontrolled immigration, causes a massive problem in the UK. That principle might have worked when all EU countries had similar standards of living. But when we have member states with a minimum wage of 80 pence an hour, migration to the UK becomes a big issue. It causes wage compression. It means experienced workers from other countries are able to take UK-based jobs and deprive British young people of their first step on the career ladder. But what we don't need is misguided European Union intervention. As the President of the EPP's Youth Wing, Kostas Kyriakis, has said, the Youth Guarantee Fund is not working. The measures push short-term employment and short-term internships, but when only 9% of interns actually go on to get that job, it's not effective. The International Labour Organization said it's ineffective. The Youth Guarantee has become guaranteed failure. Sometimes the answer isn't more Europe. The answer is for countries to work together, for national governments to innovate, for us to learn from each other, learn from best practice and learn from the many charitable organisations which have a phenomenal success rate in getting young people back into work.
Thank you, sir. You have received 3 blue cards. There is one possibility for me to give a blue card. Do you accept one question from... Yes. Mrs. Grafini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I am surprised that you, as an MEP, are considering banning the free movement of people in the European Union. I would like to ask you a question. I didn't understand you proposed anything concrete for the topic we are discussing today in order to increase youth employment. Can you mention a concrete measure that you can propose?
You have 30 seconds to answer.
Simple, isn't it? The problem that we have at the moment is that we're getting more Europe, we're getting more legislation, more red tape strangling our businesses. And of course, if we deal with that problem, then we will be much, much more competitive. And in terms of free movement, isn't the whole point that different countries with different standards of living actually have different needs? And when you try to have a one-size-fits-all straitjacket affecting 28 different countries at once, then you know that it's not going to work. The free movement is a principle of the 1950s and the 1960s. We live today in a 21st century society, and it's high time that this place grew up, recognised that the future does not lie with the failed old EU institutions.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Madame Bisotto. The floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam. In Italy, there are 10.5 million people living in poverty. More than 6 million of these are in absolute poverty. In other words, they can't get the services necessary for a proper life. That should be enough for us to understand the tragic situation of these 9 million Italians, but it's not enough. They're not enough. There are still 9 million unemployed, and of those 600,000 are unemployed are youth between 15 and 20. And what did Juncker say, the man who became President of the Commission yesterday? He said that unemployment in Italy is Italians' fault. No. The problem of Italian unemployed, European citizens, above all young ones, are arising here because of Europe not working, the failure of the single market, the failure of the euro. Bare bones wages. lowering wages. This is a Europe for banks, and it's the enemy of citizens. Your President Juncker, the one that you voted for yesterday, said yesterday that we need new immigrants, 50 million immigrants, he said, because we need labour. We need a labour force. But does he know that there are 25 million unemployed in Europe? Does he know that in Europe a fourth of young people can't find a job? We don't need immigrants. The labour market is saturated. There isn't room for a single immigrant as long as there's no job for our young people. We need to help our young people, giving them hope, giving them a future. The young of Europe need a different Europe, a more effective and a fairer one.
Thank you, Madam MEP. Morin-Chartier is the next speaker. The floor is yours, Madam Morin-Chartier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Well, I'm really taken aback that this morning the Council has left its seats empty for this important question, and that's just the reflection of what's just happened in the last legislature on this policy for youth employment. This youth employment policy was carried by the Parliament and by the Commission, but it was not borne by the Council. And that's why we're suffering today, because obviously it's the establishment of this policy in the Member States which is lacking today. Now I'd like to come back to the substance of this policy. This policy is first of all to support in the European Social Fund, the Youth Guarantee, which ought to be the groundswell of our policy here. The initiative for youth employment, and I've heard a lot of confusion this morning, the Youth Employment Initiative is just the visible part of the iceberg. The €6 billion is what is the fund we've obtained, so that in 2014 and 2015 there are immediate policies which are established by the Member States in favor of young people. Now, of course, the heads of state and government of course wanted to just produce communications on this subject than to do anything really about it, as Karima DELLI said. And we have to get them down to work because we need plans. And of course this disrupts these government policies and their failure in apprenticeship and the link between academic education and professional life. The sectors of continuous training is something we have to do something about too. Yes, we need the Council to get involved. We need forms of contracts for young people which are stable. Yes, we have to deal with those between 25 and 30 years of age who stay in university because they can't find a job. And we have to help the SMEs to create jobs. We have to help mobility of youth and of course do something about taxing jobs, and it's only in this way that the head of state and government will actually carry out efficient policies between now and 2015.
Thank you, madam. You receive a blue card.
Yes. Etheridge képviselő úr.
Mr. Etheridge has 30 seconds to ask his question.
More money,
yes,
more spending.
Okay. Yes, okay.
The question I want to ask is, are you not aware that the answer is never more government, and the answer is surely our young people need work if they have more opportunity, because there is a less flow of immigrants coming into the countries to fill the jobs. Surely our young people can then get a footing and a start in the workplace, rather than constantly being undercut and beaten by people coming from elsewhere in the continent who aren't required. Our young people need work in their own countries.
Please take the floor to answer the question.
Ne comptez pas sur moi, cher.
Well, don't count on me, colleague, to think like you, that youth employment would be linked to closing our borders. Youth employment means that we need education and training policies which are adapted to evolution in jobs, and companies, new professional sectors, which we'll see between now and 2020. All these studies that we've carried out here show that we have to invest in developing training. Thank you.
Madam, your speech has generated a lot of interest, so you receive a second blue card. Are you willing to answer? Ms. Rodriguez Pinheiro, 30 seconds. The floor is yours.
Rodriguez Pinheiro.
Madam Rodriguez Pinheiro, please.
Oh, Madame Berès.
Oui,
Yes. Valószínű másik szék.
I'm sorry, maybe you have taken a different seat than normally. Madame Berès, yours.
Madame Morin-Chartier, est-ce que vous reconnaissez que cette...
Do you recognize that this youth guarantee, not only did we fight to establish it, but we fight so that it could already benefit young people up to the age of 30, that it can be directly financed by the European Social Fund, and that France, where the government of Mr. Manuel Valls is being exemplary in implementing it, because we seem to be the first country to have established this youth guarantee.
C'est un peu une question franco.
This seems to be an internal French question. If we fought to obtain all this, we fought together, you and I, with the Commission and vis-à-vis the Council in a lot of trilogues. And I must say that today, as MEP, there's one point that I thought was very important when the Commissioner made his when he talked about implementation, and that is the fact that today 1/3 of the country who need and who have access to this fund, the Youth Employment Initiative. I don't want to talk about the Youth Guarantee Scheme because that's wrong. But the Youth Employment Initiative is only being established in 1/3 of the European countries, so I call on the heads of state and government to do their duty.
Thank you. The next speech will be by Madame ULVSKOG.
ULVSKOG képviselőasszony, parancsoljon.
Fru talman.
President. Well, I'd like to talk about the situation in the northern part of Europe, in Sweden. There too we also have high youth unemployment, and therefore we also supported the Youth Employment Initiative. But the Swedish government decided recently to only pay out a fraction of the EU funds because of budgetary reasons. Now, in the western part of Sweden, we've seen an example of what this leads to. There are projects which could start if they got EU funding, but they just don't get the money any longer. And there's a lot that you can criticize EU for when it comes to the handling of the economic crisis, but there are also national governments which are not utilizing the possibilities they have. So I'd like to ask the Commissioner, how do you look at this reduction of targeted efforts that the Swedish government has decided on concerning youth unemployment? What can you do, and what are you considering doing? Thank you.
Képviselőasszony. Következő hozzászól.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. KRASNODY in 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the measures which is to be used to tackle the youth unemployment is the workers' mobility. That obviously is playing into the hands of such countries as Germany, where there are shortages on the labor market. Freedom of movement is one of the fundamental achievements of the European Union, and I wouldn't be in favor of closing down the borders, but we must be aware of the consequences of this mobility. This particularly concerns such countries as Poland. Since 2004, 2 million young people left Poland. However, without this migration, the unemployment would have been even higher. But this actually contributes to the economic downturn. And on top of that, the migrants are usually ready to accept jobs below their qualifications. One of the reasons people migrate is that they would like to start a family. And the economic migration is because of the increasing disequilibrium between the core of Europe and the rest of the pack. This is not a solid solution. This just testifies to the differences among the European countries, and we must make sure that this opinion is duly reflected in all the programs to come.
Sir, you have spoken too long. I would like to ask all other MEPs to please keep within your timeline, your time frame. Please respect all the others by allowing them to speak. Mr. Tom, in 1 minute, please.
Igen, úgy látom, hogy nincs a teremben.
He's not in the room. In that case, the next MEP will be Erik.
Képviselő úr, 1 perc.
Sir, you have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. There will be no European project for the future as long as youth continues to be sacrificed on the altar of European austerity. The so-called Youth Guarantee project needs to be made more ambitious so that no young person between 18 and 30, and with no exceptions, is in unemployment or living a precarious life. You need at least 21 billion, as the International Labour Office is asking for. We did, after all, find $1 trillion for the banks. That will make an independence payment allowance for each young person so that he or she can be trained and get a first job. We need a European reconversion fund to change all the precarious jobs into permanent ones. We need new rights leading to jobs. We need the major companies to be committed to targets with figures in them for youth employment, and we also need a European future investment fund for the public service and for ecological change. In each country we need a minimum wage, since Mr. Juncker committed himself to that yesterday, and the Erasmus program should be extended to the greatest possible number, increasing the number of bursaries and introducing progressiveness according to family income. Thank you.
Vana képviselő.
Madam Vana, 1 minute, please.
Vana képviselő asszony.
Ich möchte den Kampf gegen
I don't think that we can measure the fight against youth unemployment just by the fine words we've heard today, and we should rather look at the actions that have been taken. When we look at the member states, what's been done on the implementation of the youth guarantee and the measures that are taken at the national level, if we look at that and make progress in that field, then we will be one step further. And if we rethink the deficit procedure, then again we will be making a step in the right direction when dealing with youth unemployment. For the countries in particular that are in budgetary difficulties, this is important. We need more effective implementation of youth strategies and better checking and auditing of the implementation. Unemployment is one problem, but the general life circumstances is another matter. Many young people are living in precarious situations and unable to find full-time employment. This is where more decisive action is needed and effective measures need to be taken to secure the future of Europe.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Ljunggren in 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you. This is my first time to speak in this political house, and that is why I want to start with the following things to make something clear. I already said this to Mr. Juncker in a meeting when Mr. Juncker visited our group with members who are fighting for their sovereignty and democracy in the EFDD. We love Europe, a beautiful continent, but we are against this terrible union. Of course, we really want to work together with other countries in Europe, but not in this way, and we don't want to lose our own sovereignty. Every day we see that national power is being transferred to Brussels. It won't take long before we have no say anymore about our own future. The United States of Europe will be a fact, with Sweden as a providence. In Sweden we have 25% young people out of work. Why is this happening? The European Council came with a youth employment initiative. This EU strategy is a real failure. It has been set up to support young people not in education, employment or training in the regions, with a youth employment rate in 2012 of above 25%. There are very large disparities between the youth employment rates in different regions. For example, in Spain and Cyprus, the rates of youth unemployment in December 2013 were 54.3% and 40.8% respectively. In Greece, the youth unemployment rate for November 13 was 59%. In Sweden, it stands currently at around 25%. The problem is that most of the EU funding allocated to address youth unemployment would be allocated to countries with a much higher youth unemployment rate than Sweden. So we are the backyard and we can pay for the other countries, which is totally unfair. As I said, it's very easy to be solidary with other people's money. Youth unemployment is today again an item on the agenda of this House. Again, recommendations on how to tackle youth unemployment in the EU. Again, we are trying to make it easier for young people to move to jobs or training, and to call the EU for support and quality standards for traineeships and apprenticeships. Well, let me explain to you something. It doesn't matter how many times we put youth unemployment on the agenda. It doesn't matter if we add another 300 billion euro of Mr. Juncker to boost jobs and growth. The EU will not succeed. Our taxpayers already contributed all of the money to the EU, and now again Mr. Juncker wants to have more money for his first top priority as Commission President. More money for what? More money to create jobs. That is pure communism. It shows we can see Mr. Juncker running away on the communistic highway even before he got elected. We want a better and stronger Sweden, but above all we want our sovereignty back.
Thank you. The next speaker is Fountulis. Mr. Fountulis, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Well, combating youth unemployment in Europe is for all of us an obvious objective. And this has to be a priority for the various governments of all of our countries. We see 60% of young people unemployed in Greece, so we have to sound the alarm. Programs in Greece to face up to this youth unemployment are being run by the Greek government, and it's not being very effective. Money only arrives with a year's delay, and the government, instead of utilizing this money supplied by the taxpayers, uses it to pay off a deficit. And following what the Troika says. Now we've planned that there are going to be more layoffs in the public sector, and these layoffs are even higher in the private sector. So the countries of the South need more money because they've suffered more than the other countries from the austerity programs and from the crisis, so that we can fight youth unemployment, so young people are not forced to go abroad.
Please finish your speech.
And I'd like, as a new MEP, to speak a little more because I've got other things to say too. We realize that after the vote, well, people left the chamber. So you get the impression that the problem's been solved, or people aren't interested in the problem?
Thank you very much. Yes, it's true. You've got to get used to what's happening at Parliament, and please respect your speaking time next time. Now the next speaker is Mr. Mann. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We experienced Jean-Claude Juncker getting a great majority as President of the Commission yesterday. He spoke about a new state for the European Union with a 10-point agenda. Better jobs, action against youth unemployment were among those. We can't leave young job seekers on their own. We have a youth guarantee which is better than a lot of previous speakers have said. In October 2010 I wrote a report for this House on this subject. We had an ambitious desire then. We wanted young people to have an extension up, the program to be extended up to the age of 30. Now we've got the first measures against youth unemployment, but we've got problems in the member states with implementation, and that needs to be remembered. We've got to have targeted help now, not in a few months. And there are sectors of industry that have high potential for job creation, and they need to be encouraged, and we need to act against deindustrialization. Young people need support. SMEs are the job engine of Europe. They create more than 2/3 of new jobs. Unemployment figures in Europe are spreading apart from different member states. So this is different from each member state. It's 7.8% in Germany, and one reason for that comparatively low figure is that everybody can get training and in or out of the school, and that is a good model that we can offer others. A lot of unregistered young people are ignored, even in Germany, and that's not fair. Everybody should be entitled to advice and support at a high level. That increases his possibility of getting a job through the through the ESF supported schemes. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. López Fernández. The floor is yours.
Como bien sabéis,
Thank you. Well, as you know, youth unemployment is the symptom of all of the despair of this continent. During recent years, we've talked a lot about this in the EU, and we're seeing how in some countries the personal option of emigrating has become an obligation of a whole generation, unfortunately. An obligation of a generation. The alarm in terms of the lack of hope for a whole continent where youth and it's not finding employment is condemning their future. And this is why we created the Youth Guarantee Fund, and we're starting to employ it in some countries. And now I come from the country that unfortunately has the highest rate of unemployment in the whole Western world, Spain. And more than a quarter of the Youth Guarantee funds will go to Spain. So we have to see what we're going to do in our country with this money. Unfortunately, we think that it's probably going to be used fraudulently used for public procurement, something we know doesn't work, as one more tool of the strategy for internal assessment, which means that parents hire their children using European subsidies without these aid being paid back. This is what's happening in our country. And furthermore, we know that as we're trying to meet deficit objectives, we've got countries with more unemployment that have these deficit goals, which turns out to be totally counterproductive. So we have to find a response to the real scope of this problem. During recent years, during the crisis, we've been spending between 600,000 and €1 million on this. We said, oh, the problem was systemic, the problem was too big, but the problem is whether the new young generations are systemic and whether we're just going to drop them. Thank you. That's the question we have to answer.
Thank you. There is a blue card.
Rodrigues Rubio képviselő asszony, öné a szó 30 másodperc.
Miss Rodriguez, 30 seconds.
Mr. López González, don't you think that the increase in retirement age has had a direct impact on youth unemployment, which is something that both the Socialists and the EPP party implemented? Microphone, please.
Micro, please.
Mucho me temo.
Well, I do fear that the problems that we have of youth unemployment in Spain are due to a lot more causes than that. And so we're trying to explain that the economic policy that Europe has had over the last years, both the restrictive monetary policy and the internal devaluation to gain competitiveness, which is a great euphemism for impoverishment of the labor force, only increases unemployment. As you know, unemployment in all countries among young people is double the rate of normal unemployment, which is the same thing in Spain. This is the situation that we have to find a response to.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. ZDECHOVSKÁ. 1 minute, please.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, vážená pani predsedajúca. Nezamestnanosť mladých na Slovensku je v posledných rokoch alarmujúca.
Youth unemployment in Slovakia has reached alarming levels over the past year. Thousands of people who have no jobs and are not used to working and don't have the right skills and are now feeling that their studies were in vain. We've got more than 1/3 of all unemployed who are young people, and a significant proportion of these people suffer from physical or other disabilities. We need to make sure that no child, no young person is excluded from the educational system, and we need to be more creative about making lifelong learning possible so that people have the skills that are adapted to the labour market. We need to make working conditions more flexible and less expensive in terms of the taxation. This would make it possible for millions of people to benefit from
Thank you very much.
Rather than using expensive subsidies.
Képviselő úr, 1 perc áll rendelkezésére. Parancsoljon.
Thank you, Chairman. I was supposed to become a member in the European Parliament. I was to become a member to realize what minute means. I have to welcome the efforts to resolve this phenomenon. If it is a phenomenon, it means that it has some root causes. Unless we deal with the root causes, if we're not aware of them, the phenomenon cannot go away. Sometime investing funds in this phenomenon, it is as if you poured water into the sand. To my mind, and not only in my opinion, the equation of happiness in life is the ratio between what you think you can do and what indeed you know what to do. The question that arises when it comes to an employer and young people is, what can you do? And it is a question that we can hardly answer. Either we are young or older. I'm a Romanian. One of my nephews is a stomatologist, and the other nephew is an ship commander.
Please conclude. It is true, it's very difficult to say everything in 1 minute. Our next speaker is Mrs. Lopez in 1 minute.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The Commission observes that the youth employment scheme has been a failure, and it's giving 6 billion over 2 years for the Youth Guarantee Fund. Do you think that budget is sufficient for proper jobs with rights for European young unemployed people? To give you an example, in Spain there are 55% of youth unemployment. Rescuing the Spanish banking sector, 41 billion euros. Youth program, 1.8 million euros over 2 years, approximately 70 euros a head.
Excuse me, obviously you will be able to continue, but I think there is a slight problem with the German interpretation. Having said that, it seems to be okay now, so please carry on. I'm sorry for the interruption.
¿Desde dónde sigo? Sí. ¿Desde dónde sigo, Presidenta? ¿Desde dónde?
Yes, shall I carry on from where I left off, or shall I start again?
Could you please continue from where you stopped?
Tekintettel arra, hogy ez bonyolult, kérem kezd.
Well, this seems to be a bit complicated, so please start everything all over again.
As I was saying, if I use 70 euros maximum from the start, all right, I'll start again. So, the Commission recognizes that the youth employment program has been a failure. The budget was totally inadequate, and I was giving the example of Spain. 51% of youth unemployment. Rescue of the banks cost 41 billion and 1.8 million for 2 years approximately for youth, for young unemployed. 70 euros a month. When the Commission, the Council and part of this House have been convinced that the banking industry was more important. We've got the President of the International Monetary Fund who's proposing that minimum wages be reduced from 600 euros in the case of Spain in order to hire more young people. That's going to mean more discrimination, now discrimination for being young. So in conclusion, if we want to finish youth unemployment, it's easy. Stop the austerity policy, put growth above deficit and paying debts. Bet on the side of research, development, innovation, investment, added value from jobs, bigger budgets. You're not going to create jobs by reducing social security and destroying collective bargaining as reforms do. You're not going to create more companies if there isn't more demand, and there isn't going to be more demand if there aren't proper wages. Once and for all, let's put people first.
Thank you, madam. The next speaker is Mr. Urtasun.
Képviselő úr, 1 perc.
1 minute, please.
Bien, muy buenos días.
Good morning, Commissioner Andor. The situation facing young people in Europe is dramatic. Some of the previous speakers have already explained this. 54% unemployment amongst young people in Spain. We have proposals such as the Youth Guarantee, but at the same time the European semester is damaging the employment situation. Young people currently live in very precarious situations, and I want to know what specific measures will be taken, because currently the measures are being taken that attack their basic rights. In Spain, what's going to happen is that there will be tax breaks set up which won't be effective at all. So Commissioner Andor, may I ask you, what will you do to check up on Spain's implementation, and what will you do about the wrong implementation of this measure in some of the member states such as Spain? Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Annemans.
Dames en heren, collega's van de meerderheid.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Well, in the majority that we've seen here today, in electing the president for this president, or the president of this parliament and the president of the commission, I'd like to contradict them and say that the CO2 emissions from their one-way thinking is one of the problems we have. If the European Union is going to be considered a social and economic union, well, this is not true. It's a being that consists of a person made up of various parts, and where money is being transferred from the north to the south, and we have to stop this monolithic thinking. We see that it's an economic and social space, but that's wrong. It's a shame on Europe, because, and I think we have to point out that this wrongful integration thinking is going to be my goal.
Mrs. Šojdrová és Mr. ZDECHOVSKY képviselőtársaim részéről kék kártya érkezett, vagy ügyrendi hozzászólás, meghallgatom mind a kettőt. 30 másodperc. Ez a sorrend. Šojdrová képviselőasszony. Šojdrová.
Madam, the floor is yours.
Yes.
Myslím, že můžu. Ano, doufám, že mě slyšíte. Dobrý den, děkuji. Já jsem jenom chtěla...
Hope you can hear me. I just wanted to point out that those who were talking about improving the quality of education and removing the obstacle to employment are of course right. The EU is now trying to help to find a job or position or traineeship for those who are disadvantaged. I very much appreciate the youth guarantee in particular because it helps employers to create new jobs. That's the experience of the Czech Republic. I want to ask the Commissioner to ensure the efficiency of this program.
Could you please look at the rules? When you've got a blue card, you can ask a question to one of your colleagues. You haven't done so. You don't have any speaking time. So unfortunately, I can't give you the floor. You need to have speaking time so that you can say what you think. The next speaker is Mr. ZDECHOVSKY. Is this a similar contribution or a blue card contribution? Blue card?
This is a question to a Spanish colleague. I wanted to ask, when they were talking so excitedly about the EU not doing anything and about funds being abused, what will you do to prevent the funds from being abused as MEPs?
Képviselő úr, öné a szó.
Sir, the floor is yours.
Mr. Gurdas.
Mr. Gurdas.
Mr. Urtasun képviselő.
Mr. Urtasun, could you please answer the question? Perhaps you were not listening to the question, so please could you discuss this issue, the two of you? The next speaker is Mr. Fernandez.
Repitiera la pregunta, si fuera tan amable.
Could you be so kind as to repeat the question?
Én szívesen megismételném.
Yes, quite willingly, but I wouldn't like to take other people's time. You've had a blue card, you were discussing something with somebody else and you didn't have your headphones on, so could you please get in touch with your colleague and discuss the issue, the two of you, and I give the floor now to Mr. Fernandez.
Sí, así lo haremos, gracias.
We shall do that as you've suggested.
Muito obrigado, Sra. Presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, the European Union can't waste its energy, its competitiveness and the creativity of youth. These are essential things for social and material cohesion. Youth are a solution, not a problem. The number of young unemployed are unacceptable. It's even more worrying in the poorer regions and in the less densely populated regions. The Youth Employment Scheme makes it possible the use of 6 billion euros for 2014 and 2015. But Commissioner, what happens afterwards, 2016 to 2020? What are your proposals? The Union still has the first job scheme, the Erasmus Plus scheme. It has cohesion fund policies. The European Cohesion Fund, for example, which should be used to create jobs, but we need effective and quick use of these funds and of these programs. At the moment, we see a paradox. We have unemployment, but we also have jobs unfilled. And that means that research becomes ever more important. We need training for that. And the European Social Fund cannot ignore this reality nor the dynamics of the market. If it did that, it would be good for young people and for companies. In job creation, we still need to pay more attention to SMEs and give them a favorable climate. We have funds for this, we have programs, we have instruments, but we need to reduce the bureaucracy, because that's the only way that we can encourage entrepreneurialism and therefore create jobs for young people.
Köszönöm, képviselő úr.
Thank you. You've got a blue card.
Do you accept it? Yes, of course. Szanyi képviselő úr, öné a kérdés.
Mr. Sanyi, the floor is yours. You've got 30 seconds.
Köszönöm szépen a lehetőséget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask Mr. Fernandez, even though I agree with him in that we don't have enough available money in the European Youth Guarantee, but when you say we need more money, well, what do you think personally, specifically, how much money would you spend on this?
Fernandez képviselő.
Thank you. Mr. Fernandez, please answer the question.
Eu devo-me ter explicado mal porque eu disse...
I must have explained myself badly because I said we had enough programs and enough resources. I was talking about the Youth Employment Initiative with 6 billion euros. What I also said is that it's not enough just to have money and programs. The programs have to be implemented swiftly. Everybody has to do his own homework. Each member state has to reduce bureaucracy, has to remove obstacles to growth and to employment. We have funds, we have programs, but we also have to reduce all the obstacles to growth. Thank you.
Köszönöm, képviselő úr.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Regner.
Just a moment, please. Yes.
Jetzt funktioniert. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, I come from a country, Austria, where the crisis led to a doubling of the funds available for the fight against unemployment. This is an investment that has paid off, quite obviously. We have one of the lowest rates of youth unemployment across the whole of Europe. So investing in young people pays. So from a social democrat perspective, we need to recognize that the measures to fight unemployment need to be incorporated into the European semester and need to be made binding, and there should be a right to youth guarantee support for young people. Young people are not a burden, they are a value and an asset for us, so every investment is well worthwhile and pays.
Köszönöm, képviselő asszony.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Stevens.
Dank u wel, collega's.
Thank you, colleagues. Well, young people are our future, and this high unemployment is a priority for us. But we have to look at who does what. The EU has to promote employment, jobs, through necessary labour market reforms, and create good climates for investment in business. And the differences in youth unemployment between different countries and regions show that unemployment comes from improperly functioning national and regionally functioning systems. But of course, EU can supplement this with various support, but this is something that shouldn't take away from the member states their own duties. I mean, the region I represent, Flanders, has as a priority activation programs for young people, and we're also working with the Youth Guarantee. And I would also like to speak in favor of helping young people that have handicaps or that are immigrants so they get a chance to get a job. Thank you.
Köszönöm, képviselő.
Thank you very much. Madam, you have a blue card.
You have a blue card. Yes? Mrs. Moy.
Ok, faccio parte del Movimento 5 Stelle.
I'm a member of the Five Star Movement, and I'd like to say that there's all this talk about young people, and a lot of money has been invested, but nobody's ever checked where the money ended up. In my country in particular, and particularly in my region, Sardinia, a lot of money was used badly on training courses. It ended up in the hands of a few people who defrauded the European community, which never investigated the matter but closed its eyes. I think we should be paying attention to that. Thank you.
Madam, I'm not sure that this concerns the House immediately, but the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is a question of shared responsibility. Your own country, Italy, has to cooperate with the Commission, but of course the individual member states have to see to it that the funds are not illicitly used. It's your responsibility. You have to turn to your national authorities to complain.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Weigel.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me use this opportunity to thank Mr. Andor for his excellent work in the previous term and for the numerous positive initiatives benefiting the young. I hope that our listeners today, who are mostly young people, understand that our interest in their problems is sincere, that we want to help them resolve their issues, that we want to enable them a better future with decent jobs and employment opportunities. In the previous term, among other, we adopted the Youth Guarantee, and I think it is only right to provide decent funding for this instrument. The same goes for other instruments, because if we only have long lists of instruments with very little funding, not much can be done for the young. Now, what I also think would be beneficial is a report on the transparency of the use of our funding. I think this would improve efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mrs. Boylan. 1 minute, please.
Almost a quarter of young people today in Ireland are unemployed, and the figure would be much higher if we took into account those who've been forced to emigrate. Those who do manage to find work are often expected to accept precarious or part-time work which suits the profits of employers but little else. They're faced with a dire option of emigration or unemployment, and many young people are being utterly exploited in the name of so-called flexible working conditions. We must provide our youth with real options for their career, properly paid apprenticeships which give an equal benefit to both parties. If we are to address youth unemployment seriously, then we need a properly considered and funded youth guarantee which will protect our young people against the worst effects of this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. The next speaker is Mr. Maragall. You've got 1 minute.
Si començo parlant en la meva llengua.
The interpreters regret that this honourable member is speaking what is not an official language and which cannot therefore be interpreted.
Y sigo en castellano.
Now I'll carry on in Spanish, in my mother's language, also mine. We have a debt which is as enormous as it is illegitimate, a debt to our young people. Over the last 10 years we've destroyed their present and their future. We've taken the most important thing away from them, the possibility of turning themselves into full citizens. So it's deplorable that the meeting that was planned in Turin on the 11th of June was cancelled. The Council and Commission are still running into debt towards our young people. If we want to look at this in the face, there are 3 things we have to consider: rights, education and investment. First of all, it's a question of rights. It's not just help and subsidies. The youth guarantee, the proper minimum wage, the unemployment insurance need to have a tangible place in European policy and in the policy of each member state. There need to be sufficient resources for each of these things, and there needs to be European monitoring of their proper application. Secondly, education and its proper link with work. It needs to be immediately available to each young person, as well as mobility and the real possibility of a European labour market. And thirdly, you need investment. Budgetary consolidation and debt shouldn't take the priority. What about the 300 billion that Mr. Juncker mentioned for investment? When are we going to see that?
Could you please conclude, sir? Thank you very much. You've exceeded your speaking time by 50 seconds. The next speaker is Mr. Iwaskiewicz. You've got the floor.
President, ladies and gentlemen. Frankly speaking, youth unemployment should not be discussed either by this Parliament or by the Commission. The more standards, rules, directives, regulations and resolutions you produce, the worse the situation is for entrepreneurs and as a result also for the youth who are entering the labour market. I deeply believe that it's not just young people but everyone that deserves employment facilitation measures. All social and professional groups should have an equally easy access to jobs. What can be done then, really, to make it easier for people to find their first or their next job? Every national state should answer the question itself, depending on the state of its economy, political conditions, and cultural traditions. In the case of Poland, we certainly need to ease the administrative and tax burden which oppresses every Polish company. Thank you.
Yes, 130, yes. Köszönöm, képviselő úr.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having respected your speaking time. The next speaker is Mrs. JAZŁOWIECKA.
Thank you, Chairman. Now the European economy is emerging from the crisis slowly but surely. The situation on the labour market still leaves a lot to be desired. There is a lot of frustration among young people who are trying to find some occupation. It is our moral duty to prioritize this issue. Now, for many years we have been complaining on the low quality of education in the European Union. 4 million jobs are still unfilled. Now, the reform of the education system under the Common European Strategy, which we talk a lot but we don't walk the talk, this is the first step to improve the situation on the labour market. A two-tier system in education is required, and also job counselling. This will allow for a better choice of a future career. The children should be, the education should be made available to children as well, so they could change their career path as soon as it is required. An investment in youth pays. Increase in mobility is also a way to tackle the problem. Unfortunately, because of the crisis, we are faced with mobility resulting from the lack of prospects. This is unacceptable. Reforms are needed in the social and economic dimension.
Grazie. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, the next speaker is Mrs. Crețu for a minute and a half.
Commissioner, we speak today of one of the most serious problems of Europe. We are all aware that finding a job is a challenge for youth in many countries who do not have the opportunity, the chance to use their qualifications. Their future is jeopardized. Your efforts, Commissioner, are worth appreciating, but I think we should target concrete results. We have to fight poverty and fighting youth unemployment should become a zero priority. I urge all the member states to promote employment among the youth so that after their graduation they could have traineeships and could have good quality jobs. Unless we mitigate the gaps among the member states, we shall never be able to speak of sustainable growth in the European Union. I call on the Commission and the Council to turn into a specific objective reducing unemployment among the youth. We should have measures included in the national reform program and in the country recommendations. Thank you.
Mr. Marias for 1 minute.
Κύριε Επίτροπε, η μαζική ανεργία που πλήττει την νεολαία στον Ευρωπαϊκό.
Mass youth unemployment, that is something we're struggling with in southern parts of Europe, leads to young people being socially excluded. In Greece, we've reached 48% on youth unemployment, even though over the past year large amounts of loans have been freed up for these measures to be implemented, but it hasn't resulted in bringing down the unemployment levels. What it's been used for is to pay off old debt that was, and to give money to French, German and other banks. If we want to fight youth unemployment, we need to invest in research and and education. With this austerity policy, we have fewer funds available to tackle the problem of unemployment. The European Commission must do something. We keep talking about fostering competition and youth unemployment is forgotten.
Arvoisa puhemies, vastavalittu komission puheenjohtaja Jean-Claude Juncker lupasi.
Thank you. The Commission President promised a new impetus for Europe, a new fresh start for Europe. And this really would mean, therefore, that the Commission considers youth employment a priority, one of its priorities. This needs to be treated as such, as a priority. That is to say, promote growth, creation of jobs, but also specific measures for young people. We need to better tailor training programs for the needs of the labour market and improve traineeships. And what this also means is that employers need to be included when it comes to the implementation of the measures to support young people. It ought to be something that's easy for employers and to implement, so that young people can really benefit from the measures.
Iglesias, per un minuto.
Thank you, Mr. Pablo Iglesias, 1 minute.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andor, in your introduction, you regretted the situation of young people in the south of Europe, and you said that youth unemployment represents a threat for democracy. And I'm very pleased that you're concerned about this, Mr. Commissioner, but of course the policies of austerity sponsored by the European Commission and by the IMF have been reflected for the young people in the south of Europe into unemployment, immigration and precarious jobs. And one of the toughest images in the south is to see young people who have university degrees working as waiters. But of course, you said that people in the south aren't trained and educated enough, but of course I think that concentrating too much on the banks is the problem, and the problem of youth unemployment isn't solved by reducing the minimum wage or with easy layoffs or reducing rights, and it isn't solved with racism, but it is solved by cleaning up the financial system. Thank you.
Edouard Ferrand, per un minuto.
Thank you, Mr. Edouard Ferrand, for 1 minute. Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. President. At the beginning of this sitting, President Schulz said some things which were improper about Mrs. Le Pen, who today represents one of the main European delegations, and I ask that the rules of procedure be respected and that members be addressed respectfully. So I'd ask President Schulz to apologize in public to Mrs. Le Pen. As regards my own speech, at the European Council on the 26th and 27th of June, there was discussion of the question of youth unemployment in Europe. Everybody knows that young people's appearance on the labour market is more and more difficult every year because of unlimited globalization, which means that both qualified young people and unqualified young people are facing unfair competition because European companies are losing market share, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, which in the nature of things create jobs. They're affected by uncontrolled immigration, which is the most obvious reflection of globalization and forces wages down. The Council conclusions are revealing. They try to talk about youth unemployment without any real policies or real measures, but the Council document is a lot more explicit. It talks about attracting ever more talent, whereas our young qualified people see the market closed to them with asylum seekers. When are the Commission and the Council finally going to understand that globalization and mass immigration are harmful for employment in general and for youth employment in particular? Thank you. Thank you. I'd urge members to stick to their speaking time, because later on we have to have a vote and there are many speakers due first. Mr. Heinz Becker for 1.5 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. Commissioner, you rightly pointed to the problem of youth unemployment and employment in general, and you talked about a lost generation. The leading social model is on the brink of destruction. But let us take a look at what's on the table today. We have a resolution that was prepared by David CASA on behalf of the EPP that will be put to the vote tomorrow. We have a 10-point programme from Commission President Mr. Juncker, and we have the Commissioner Andor's position and declaration today. We need to recognise that today, in times when Italy and France are the only countries in this crisis who are using the youth guarantee, and just 1 out of the 6 billion being used, then we cannot talk about a budgeting problem. This is a case of learning from examples, the good examples that exist in Europe, benchmarking. So when it comes to good examples, we have EURES, the employment network. It is something that needs to be implemented across the board. 2 million vacancies across Europe unfilled. It's essential that we fill those vacancies and support entrepreneurs so that they can create new jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardia Zawal, for 1 minute.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, President. Well, last May in the same hemicycle, we had 5 million young people here were debating ideas for a better Europe. And one of the clearest messages that they put across is that we ought to fight for their future, that we ought to fight so that they could have a job in coming years, because they're the ones that are suffering the most from the consequences of the recession. And of course, they're the ones that have been pushed out of the labour market. or haven't even gotten in, and they've got the least social coverage, and so therefore they're suffering the most. More poverty and more inequality. This is the future that they're seeing in front of them. Now, in the last legislature with Commissioner Andor, we were able to carry out one of our priorities to implement the youth guarantee system, but this was cut short, because the proposal of this parliament, this group, was for the youth guarantee to be for people under 30 years of age, not 25, and that it be financed not with 6 billion but with 21 billion. Well, it's a lot of money, but of course youth unemployment is costing us 150 billion, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucke, for 1 minute. Commissioner, you spoke about measures against youth unemployment, but you didn't talk about the origins of youth unemployment. If you look at this phenomenon in Europe, what you see is that it isn't a common European phenomenon. Youth unemployment in Germany is 8%, in Greece it's 60%, and in Spain it's 60%, and in Italy and in France it's between 30 and 40%. You just have to conclude that these differences are so enormous that you can't just say the Spaniards, the French and the Italians are not training their young people properly, or they don't have a German dual system, for example. It's a question of the competitiveness of the whole states. And that competitiveness is enormously undermined by the common European currency. The Commission is closing its eyes to the fact that it's the European currency which is taking the prospects away of a future for young people. It's the currency's fault that they're not finding a job, and they're turning away from Europe in disillusion because they're not finding jobs. That's a thing that the Commission needs to see and take into account properly.
Onorevole Lucke, accetta una...
Mr. Lucke, will you accept a blue card?
Onorevole, sto parlando a lei.
I'm speaking to you, Mr. Lucke. Will you accept a blue card?
Prego. 30 secondi.
30 seconds.
Dankeschön. Ja, Herr Lucke.
Thank you. Mr. Lucke, it's the lack of competitiveness that's causing the high unemployment levels in the south. Now, many colleagues here are trying to tackle the problem of lack of competitiveness through investment, which in other words means more debt. So, may I ask you, where is this going to lead us? What's the optimal level of debt? We've heard about good debt. What is your position on this? What's the optimal level?
Onorevole Lucke.
Please, Mr. Lucke, with a microphone, please.
Se non accende il microfono.
If you don't turn the microphone on, nobody can hear you. Mr. Zulig, you speak quite rightly about the problem in the European Parliament and the Commission, where the prevailing thought seems to be that state intervention through investment programs financed by debt will deal with this problem in some way, but in fact states only have a very little influence on the competitiveness of private companies. The problem is basically outside the power of any government. The only possibility for a government is to make things easier for companies to take on young people, and the way to do that is more flexibility in exchange rates. Thank you. Mr. Federley, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Well, I think what's striking this debate, how weak the reasoning is from the left and from the right. The right thinks that we're going to be stronger by closing our borders and make it possible for the job vacancies in Europe can be filled. And the left thinks that the only way of creating more jobs is to give more money and more public projects. But there are an awful lot of causes that we have to look at too. We have to have a common market so that SMEs can really function. We have to have a trade agreement with the USA that strengthens our economy, and none of our colleagues talked about the fact that we've just gone through the deepest economic recession in 100 years in Europe. And therefore, we need rules for a stronger economy for our companies. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to tackle unemployment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Obermeier for 1 minute.
We have a so-called youth guarantee, which will not really provide a solution to the problem. Where there are no jobs, we cannot guarantee jobs. And 6 billion euros is just a drop in the ocean. Academics have come up with different figures and support for academics. Well, I wonder why we need that many academics. What we see is qualifications inflation being boosted here. We need skills in new technologies, qualified workforce, and a dual educational system as it currently exists in Austria and Germany. What we do not need is an increasing inflow of migrants, leading to worsening social dumping and worsening conditions and social conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Koza for 1 minute and a half.
Dear colleagues, if you take a look at the beginning of the draft that we submitted jointly, you will see clearly that we have discussed this topic a lot of times in the European Parliament. A lot of numbers, tragic numbers, have been mentioned by all those people who spoke before me, but we also need to look at the fact that in countries where they had been fighting this issue, have there been any results? Let's see Hungary, for example. In about 1 year ago, in March 2013, we had 27.7% in unemployment among the youth. Now in Hungary it's 20%. If you take a look at other countries, there are 13 countries where there has been a reduction in youth unemployment, although the rates are different. So I believe that we will have to continue working, we will have to cooperate with the Commission and make our efforts, and not necessarily via these special projects, but maybe with more comprehensive approaches. I am convinced that improving competence and competitiveness, including quality training for young people, we will be able to improve these statistics. Finally, I don't think we should commit the same mistake over and over again in the next 10 years. If we do not dedicate a lot of energy to this situation, then we will be regenerating it again, and in the future there will be 30 million uneducated young people entering the market, the labor market. We have to prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Kosha.
Thank you, Mr. Koza. Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė, 1 minute.
30, 1 minute 30.
A minute and a half.
Thank you, President. Well, I'd like to thank the Commissioner for the information he provided us concerning the present situation, concerning youth unemployment and employment. Now, despite a lot of fine words and a lot of initiatives launched by the European Parliament, there hasn't been a lot of positive change in the area of youth employment. The efforts of the member states in order to implement the youth guarantee, are they sufficient? This state, as the Commissioner said, doesn't produce action plans, and youth unemployment cannot be explained only by, a lack of proper studies or knowledge that doesn't correspond to needs of the market. Education, vocational guidance upstream, and high-quality education adapted to market needs, of course, represent part of the solution. But for the solution to be complete, creation of jobs has to become a real priority. And then there's a third problem, discrimination of young people. Even if young people obtain a job, they are discriminated against, and that's why poverty and social marginalization among young people is so high in Europe. Young people need job security, social security. the Charter of Fundamental Rights does provide for the right to social protection for everyone, not just for experienced workers, but for young people. And I'd like to ask whether we're not paying too much attention to purely economic aspects of youth unemployment. Why aren't we not thinking about the impact of these problems on demographics? Because without stable jobs, young people aren't going to create families. That's very important for Europe too.
Škripek, un minuto.
Thank you, Mr. Škripek, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ďakujem, pán predsedajúci. Aj Slovensko má jeden z najvyšších ukazateľov.
Thank you, President. Slovakia too has high levels of unemployment. More than 1/3 of young people are unemployed, and measures need to be taken to combat that situation. We need to promote job creation for young people and ensure that the workforce is experienced and has opportunity to gather experience. We also should remember that foreign language and language skills are very important. The European Union needs to be aware also of the fact that there are problems of corruption and similar problems, which mean that only some people get the support that they need. The system itself needs to be changed. It's not enough to study and then to look for a job afterwards. No, you have to be much more creative than that and be entrepreneurial in your strategy. Things have changed. Sometime in the past, parents would be able to support their children, and but the whole family structures have changed, and there are problems with authority, and young people are no longer able to get jobs. Schooling itself needs to be changed. We need people to get practical knowledge and practical skills in addition to knowledge.
Mr. Ferrier, for 1 minute. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, this is my first speech in this House, and we've got a little economic growth in Europe, but the terrible numbers of youth unemployed remain the same. And there's a considerable economic geographic asymmetry, 7% in Germany, 60% in Germany, 30% in Portugal. It's clear that there's a need for more growth in Europe, for investment in competitiveness using the structural funds and the European Investment Bank funds as a lever for private funds to create youth jobs. We hear that this is going to be at the top of the new President of the Commission's agenda, and one measure is extending the youth guarantee from 25 to 30 years, covering these 6 million or so needs who are not in education, employment or training. And more important still, we need to use the contributions of the European Social Fund and the ERDF and the EARDF to create youth jobs. Unless we are stronger in fighting youth unemployment, Europe will end up condemning a whole generation to social exclusion and the loss of their European citizenship. Is the Commission really committed to face up to that challenge? Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Lenaers.
Thank you. Mr. Lenaers, a minute and a half.
Wel, voorzitter. Voorzitter, de jeugd heeft de toekomst.
President. Well, young people have a future. Well, that doesn't seem so obvious in Europe today. We have to see to it that our young people do have a future. Let's not talk about a generation that's been lost. We have to have young people who can and will work if they get an opportunity. The youth guarantee and the youth programs are excellent means, but they're not a panacea, because fighting youth unemployment has to be fought in the member states themselves first and foremost. So I don't know if giving big subsidies to projects is the answer. We have to have sustainable reforms in the member states on the labor market and in the economy. We have to have better access to the labor market after education. And companies have to be supported so they can function properly and maybe even start new businesses. This is how we can create jobs in the long term. And one thing more. If I can put a question to Commissioner Andor, one of the most important things, one of the most vulnerable groups amongst young unemployed are, of course, the young homeless. and this instrument doesn't to do something with this challenge that these young people face. What can we do here to also make certain that these young people have a future in Europe too?
Thank you. You were perfectly in your time. Mr. Gutiérrez Prieto for 1 minute.
Commissioner, we're talking about youth unemployment and youth employment, which is much more than just the youth guarantee. Now, we need to make sure there's enough funding in there. We've got a shortfall of 15 million euros that the ILO called for. We wanted to make sure the guarantee was Europe-wide and available in all of the member states. This debate is about much more than that. It's about the policies that the European Commission adopted under the European semester, which caused wide-scale job losses, and we are now seeing problems with job mobility for young people who are unable to seek opportunities abroad. We also have problems with widespread fraud in the different member states, and it's difficult to stem this corruption. So, Commissioner, when we talk about employment, it's not just a right of people, it's the binding fabric that allows a citizen to feel part of fully fledged part of society. If we want to have a solid society, we need to offer more jobs for young people. It's our duty to ensure that young people have that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a blue card for you. Will you accept it? Mr. Gutiérrez Prieto, will you accept the blue card?
Onorevole Korwin.
Mr. Gutiérrez Prieto is from Spain, and he should remember that Spain was a leading power in the world, but he's got gold from Spain.
Se per cortesia si può alzare.
Could you stand up, please?
Sì, se per cortesia può alzarsi.
Could you stand up, please?
Grazie.
Should remember, Senor Gutiérrez Prieto should remember that Spain was the leading power of the world. It got the gold from the South America, and he dropped to the 4th place in the world, or 3rd place. The money doesn't help. The money harms, because if you get money, you buy something from abroad, and you are losing jobs and not getting them.
Prego, onorevole Gutiérrez Prieto.
Mr. Gutiérrez Prieto, please. You have 30 seconds. Thank you for recalling history for our benefit. But there are millions of European citizens who are losing money today. The Commission has already acknowledged that having a paid job in a number of member states is not enough to have a decent standard of living. The austerity policies pursued in recent years are a betrayal of the European social model. Need I recall what happened 500 years ago? We need to concentrate on what we're going to do for Europe over the next 50 years to save people from this crisis. The President, thank you. May I say that from now on we'll be able to take no more blue cards because we're running out of time and we have to proceed to the voting session. Mr. Frankel, 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, one thing must be striking, and that is that for years now the world economy has been growing more than the European economy, and it should also be striking that the Eurozone's growth is more sluggish than Europe's. And I think that it has to be made clear that growth in the south of Europe is considerably weaker than it is in the north, and there are various consequences. First of all, we're complaining about the deindustrialization in the south of Europe and not in the Eurozone. We're also talking about increasing unemployment rates in the south of Europe and youth unemployment in the south of Europe, not in the north of Europe. The reason is quite simple. The euro has become too difficult and too expensive for the south of Europe, and all of the economists and increasing numbers of politicians in the south are complaining about this, which is why in this Parliament we have to talk about the one-size-fits-all currency and the problems related to that. Because if we've got a one-size-fits-all currency, I think it would be better to call it a one-size-fits-none.
Thank you. Monika VANA, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday I heard the candidate, Mr. Juncker, say that the economy should serve people and not the other way round. Certainly, it's appalling that we've had to wait 4 years to discover the obvious. 50% youth unemployment is simply going to lead people to turn their backs to Europe, and that's hard, that's painful, but the cause is not Europe, it's the member states. It's the member states dragging their feet on reform, and they've let down a whole generation. Now Europe must go to the rescue of young people by allowing credit to flow, allowing more trade with other countries, and putting in place the youth guarantee scheme.
Onorevole Sofia Ribeiro.
Thank you. Sofia Ribeiro for 1.5 minutes. You have the floor, madam. President, I'm a member of disagree. I particularly endorse the support expressed for regions with the highest levels of unemployment. A number of extremely important programs were launched in the previous parliamentary term to fight youth unemployment. Despite that, they've not been as successful as we had planned. In my region, one of the outermost regions, the Azores, youth unemployment has reached the ridiculous level of around 40%. There's still much to be done in creating worthy, lasting jobs. Fighting youth unemployment has to be a lot more than a party political exercise in point scoring. We need commitment and partnership with the various stakeholders. We need guarantees for young people over 25, such as in my country, Portugal, not just France. In this way we can also support better qualified young people. They will be better equipped with the professional experiences they need. We also defend the need to work together with SMEs to create tax incentives to encourage them to employ young people, and we need initiatives to encourage entrepreneurship and European startups. Fighting youth unemployment also requires fighting social and cultural inequality across Europe. That means that we also need to encourage the excellence mark for training and vocational systems with sandwich courses, building and concentrating on the content and outcomes of those courses. Thank you. Now, Mr. Jungerius, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. Honourable Commissioner, after the financial crisis affected us as a continent, it was followed by a major social crisis, and the inhabitants of Europe only want one thing, and that's work. And I think that we have to give top priority to tackling unemployment amongst young people. And I think that we need to look at the link between education and the labour market, and investments in education, preferably in the sectors which are expected to grow, would be good. And we'd have to have apprenticeships, traineeships, and plans according to which older workers can mentor younger people and teach them the tricks of the trade. We also have to address our industry policy to create jobs for those young people who want to work with their hands, to prevent a situation in which people with lower qualifications are squeezed out of the labour market by people with higher qualifications. We have to give some prospects for the future to young people, and we need a bigger budget than today's €6 billion. And I think we have to increase the age limit from 25 to 30. Europe is losing the support of population if half of young people are out of work. And my question to the Commissioner is, what can he do and what can we do to get support for greater political ambition when it comes to combating youth unemployment? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Clune for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I believe that the Youth Guarantee Scheme will be very important in tackling youth employment tackling youth unemployment, and reforming our education and training systems is a very important element of that programme that's been mentioned by the Commissioner here this morning. And I think something that we really need to concentrate on. In a recent survey of 8 European countries, 1/3 of employers said that the lack of skills amongst young people is causing major businesses problems in the form of cost, quality and time. Almost 30% of employers reported that a lack of skills was a major reason they didn't fill their vacancies. And employers from countries with the highest youth unemployment reported the greatest problems due to skills shortages. Youth unemployment is not a new problem for Europe, and we should note it. In 1995 it was at 21%, and since then it hasn't gone below 15%. So it's an institutional issue, and a critical reason that youth do not get the skills that employers need is that education providers, young people and employers do not understand one another. They operate in parallel universe and they rarely interact. So we need to change the structure of how we teach young people skills. We need to focus on giving them the skills that the market needs and that they're able to respond to what employers really need, so that we can ensure that our young people have sustainable jobs. And I'd ask you, Commissioner, to ensure that this is a focus, not just in my country but across Europe as well. It's an institutional problem, and it's something that really needs to be tackled. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Brando-Benifei for 2 minutes. Thank you, President. As there's not much time, I will just focus on 2 points. First of all, I'm very glad to see that the Youth Guarantee has become a reality as a source of satisfaction, because this is a measure adopted as a result of an initiative from my party, the Party of European Socialists, and the Young European Socialists. We should also thank Commissioner Andor for his commitment to this initiative in what was a difficult context for it. Now, the Commission needs to strengthen the monitoring instruments. We have to bolster the youth guarantee in the Member States. It's not acceptable that what we achieved with such difficulties in Europe then grinds to a halt at the stage of implementation. We can't allow that. The colleagues have made the point that it's also vital to increase the range of resources available, and as Mr. Juncker touched on yesterday, we should extend the upper age limit for entitlement to the age of 30. Younger people are part of a more mobile generation. Free movement of workers has to be a reality even more for young people, because this lies at the heart of the completion of the single market in labour. And so I'd call on the Commission. I do trust you can just discuss this in the future with the new Commission once they have been sworn in, to promote new measures to encourage mobility amongst young European workers. For example, in terms of their pension rights. In my experience, young Europeans want a fairer, more united Europe to be built, allowing them to work all around Europe, making it possible for them to build a better future for themselves. The Commission, together with Parliament, both bear tremendous responsibility on this. Thank you. Georges Bach for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Yesterday morning, the newly elected Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said quite rightly that the crisis was not over. The crisis cannot be over until the problem of youth unemployment is resolved. Since 2008, youth unemployment has been rising in the European Union. It's 50% in some countries. We have had the money available since the 1st of September 2013 to start dealing with this problem. And so, Commissioner Andor, how is it that for the time being only 2 countries' programs have been adopted? How is it possible that it took 5 years for something to happen at European Union level? Youth unemployment has been rising since 2008. The initiative was only adopted in 2013. How can we work better And wouldn't it be right to increase the age limit to 30? Since you mentioned the Brussels seminar, can you tell us more about what the experts said? What could help? What sort of ideas could help in the projects, programs, initiatives in the member states? Because that's, I think, one of the biggest problems. We need to speed these things up. And then the best practice. Austria has already been mentioned, but Luxembourg too has a project that's been going since June of this year. And although unemployment is not so high in Luxembourg, it's still important to draw a link between schools, businesses and workplaces. I very much welcome Mr. CASA's resolution. I think it's important that we deal with this issue in this parliamentary term. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Renaud Dallon-Bonnefoy for 1.5 minutes. Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues, the point has already been made. Youth unemployment is at an unacceptable record level. It's having a particular impact on unqualified or low-qualified young workers across Europe. In the face of these impractical facts, I welcome Matteo Renzi's initiative to place youth employment in particular at the heart of European endeavours. We need to bring down youth unemployment in a way analogous to what has been done in France since François Hollande came to power. Youth are the future of Europe and must therefore be our priority. To make this a true European priority, we need to back that up with the necessary budgetary resources and therefore bring an end to the austerity drive. We therefore continue to call for €21 billion and for the extension of the age range to 30. We need to ensure that we put up the effort right across Europe. Erasmus Plus must be extended to apprentices, and the Leonardo programme needs to be strengthened. Europe-wide recognition of vocational experience as a result of placements needs to be accelerated. Training is an important factor in employability, so we need to look at how we organise recognition of placements. We need more Europe if we're going to take effective action in getting more jobs for young people. Thank you. 1.5 minutes for Mr. Mureșan.
Microfono.
Your mic has gone off.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, youth unemployment is far too high in Europe. Anything we can do to reduce unemployment, anything we can do to offer traineeships is welcome. The youth guarantee is useful. I think we need more than that, though. The fact is, young people want stable, well-paid work. They don't want yet another traineeship. They want to be able to feed their family, buy a house. The reality is that jobs are primarily created by entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses, family firms, the private sector. We need to allow the private sector to operate in an economic framework where they can invest, where they can have faith in a competitive economy. That's going to generate stable, well-paid jobs in the long run. Europe needs reform. Commissioner, colleagues, I invite you all to work together over the coming months to implement an ambitious economic reform agenda which will enhance our competitiveness, increase investor confidence, generate jobs, and that is the best possible way to roll back unemployment. And secondly, there are significant discrepancies between the level of youth unemployment in different member states. More than 50% in Greece, Spain, under 10% in Germany. I propose, Commissioner, we put in place a European mechanism, an EU-level mechanism for exchanging best practice between EU member states as regards measures to prevent and combat youth unemployment. And let's see which measures have worked in those countries with low youth unemployment and which of those measures can be transferred to the countries where unemployment is still high. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Kirkos for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I believe that what we are witnessing is that there's a weak link in the chain, and that's young people alongside minorities and women. This means that more and more measures have to be adopted to ensure that these people are not exploited by employers or by others. So, I believe that we need to promote innovation, we need to provide fresh opportunities, and we also want to promote sustainable growth. This is why it is our duty to put on offer good education, good training programs, so that we have a safety net put in place for areas which are not quite so successful. I think that the resources made available for this kind of measure need to be topped up. We need to have an efficient absorption of this money, however, and I think that reforms are necessary. We should be thinking of that, not just about the liberalisation of markets.
Yes,
Thank you. Ms. Maria Spiraki has 1.5 minutes. Thank you, President. Commissioner, yesterday, Mr. Juncker, the President of the Commission, quite rightly made the point that within the European Commission we have 29 member states, the 29th being made up of our unemployed. And I want to speak on behalf of that member state, because you will find 1.3 million under 25-year-old, 1.3 million Greeks, half of them being under the age of 25. What are we going to do for them? And what about the 170,000 overqualified young people? Is the youth guarantee enough? Even if we extend the programme to cover people up to the age of 30, will the 40 million for Greece be enough under such a programme? The answer is no. Are apprenticeship programmes actually tailored to the needs of those countries hardest hit by the crisis, particularly the southern member states? Again, I believe the answer to that question is no. We don't have a magic wand which would allow us to conjure up solutions, but we must strengthen the hand of all of those who are making efforts. We need appropriate, properly targeted policies for the needs of countries such as Greece, which will allow us to back up the whole arsenal of tools that will allow new undertakings and jobs to be created. That's the goal we must achieve, and we have to be able to put a figure on these objectives. We can't just talk about a lost generation and allow people to be pushed to the margins of society. We have to fight for young people. Thank you. Monika VANA, 1 minute.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, colleagues, Commissioner. Youth unemployment is something that arises for a number of reasons. There just aren't many jobs around as a result of the financial and economic crisis, which is now also a social crisis. We're also seeing people working longer. The pension age is now so high that older people are blocking jobs for young people. It's to do with the structure of the population in our member states, and it's also the result of the overall economic situation, with production being relocated outside the EU. Businesses want to make ever greater profits, and they do so not by providing jobs to people from the EU. The Youth Guarantee is a good instrument, but it's a short-term instrument. And for us to generate jobs, not just for young people, but for people as a whole, we need to change the social structure of EU member states and harmonize social policy in the European Union.
Thank you. Ms. Ivana Malatic, 1.5 minutes. Thank you, President. Youth unemployment is a problem which has sent out an alarm bell we have to react to. It's important to have instruments available, but we also need to look at how the money is dispersed. We need to listen to young people and get them involved in the decision-making process. What young people are telling us is that they want conditions which will allow entrepreneurship, encourage startups and create jobs. What they don't want are purely social measures, and that is what is most often offered. We shouldn't have a passive approach, leaving them backs to the wall, saying take a social handout because that's all there is. In our country, for example, we have had entrepreneurship measures. Employers will not be encouraged to keep young people on if you give tax breaks for the initial period of employment. Young people were opposed to those measures. The government had nothing else to offer, though. There are no alternatives. Young people have realised that something's better than nothing, but they deserve better than this. Europe needs to change. Croatia must change. We need to be able to adapt all the measures so that people can actually get jobs. 1 minute for Ms. Kylie.
Στην Ελλάδα με την εφαρμογή του συμφώνου και των προγραμμάτων λιτότητας, όπως γνωρίζετε και...
Thank you. Youth unemployment in Spain is something like 60% as a result of the austerity program. The European Union is the problem, not the solution, and so Euroscepticism is rising. Young people who are not in work are costing us millions. Some of the money is not being properly used, properly absorbed. That means we need better measures and mechanisms. And perhaps I could add one more thing. It is very important for businesses to have greater opportunities to invest, to borrow. They need tax incentives and stability. That's important for businesses that want to invest and employ people. We also need to see a convergence of interest rates, because there are huge differences at the moment. The EU must also embrace new technologies. There's a great deal that can be done there. Innovation is important, so as to be able to reduce the competitiveness gap between the EU and the USA and China. Jobs alone are not enough. We need jobs that are going to give Europe's young generation to make progress. We also need to help women who've very much been affected by unemployment.
Thank you. Andreas Schwab for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, the member states have committed themselves through the youth guarantee to allow young people under 25 to get a job. Well, Commissioner, that was perhaps extremely ambitious, because member states can't create jobs, only businesses and employers. And that's why I welcome the fact that in our motion we have paragraph G, which states clearly that it's first and foremost about young people acquiring the skills that are necessary to fill the vacancies that already exist. And it's not just Germany, where businesses, large and small, are desperate for workers, but even in France, Spain and Italy, businesses are looking for young people that have skills, that are capable of doing the things that business requires. Commissioner, there are jobs in the European Union, but there aren't the job applicants we need. That means we need more dovetailing between education, training and the labour market. That would solve a great many of our problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Arena for 1 minute. Thank you, President. When talking about young people, we need to know what young people we're talking about, because that will perhaps give us a clearer picture of what would be the most appropriate policies to pursue for their benefit. If we talk about less qualified young people, or the people who are switching off, well, the crisis in 2008 affected skilled people, but the youth guarantee is an effective tool for getting young people back to work, but it's not enough on its own. We therefore need to work on a real recovery plan, because that's what's going to create jobs. The Youth Guarantee, when all is said and done, would allow us better to match the range of qualifications young people have with the job opportunities that are there. In the case of less skilled young people, the same will not apply to them. The European social model has broken down. We need more decisive, more egalitarian action to fight poverty, the poverty of families and children, and the poverty among teenagers. And so we're calling for social investment criteria to be incorporated in the European semester system. We also want a statistical indicator on child poverty, because that inevitably leads to young adults also being impoverished. Thank you, Renate Weber, for 1.5 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente. Cum poate Uniunea Europeană să le asigure?
The European Union has been looking for ways to give young people jobs for years. In terms of the individuals concerned, what we're seeing is young people who see no point in education and training. We need to demonstrate that education and training is a route to jobs, either in their own member state or in another. The Youth Guarantee, though welcome, is only a partial answer to the problem of youth unemployment. We need to see a paradigm shift in the way we think about worker mobility and education and training in Europe. These are the motors of European development. School and university education needs to reflect the economic needs of the European Union as a whole. And young people should not be left to leave their home countries and go abroad in search of work. They should be helped and guided to find work in those other countries. We need partnerships between schools, universities and the private sector. That needs to be a reality across the EU, so that young people have access to the education, the training, the skills that the labour market needs. We need transnational, cross-border partnerships of this kind. All this means more Europe, more integration. We should not be afraid. We should want the young people of Europe to think the EU is their home.
Thank you. Sylvia Costa, 1 minute. Thank you, President. Commissioner Andor, Mr. Juncker, the President of the Commission, yesterday expressed a desire to extend the eligibility for youth employment measures to 30. Something similar has already been done in Italy. I'd like to reassure you that the Turin meeting on youth unemployment, the summit, has only been postponed to allow the new Commission to get up and running. Youth unemployment is growing, though, and we need to address two major challenges. First of all, we need to increase the budget to at least 21 billion for the coming years. That point has already been made. As a specific target for young people, namely access to traineeship and education must be backed by a network of services and incentives from the member states. We need to extend apprenticeship to other sectors of work, a new employment policy, in other words. Then the twofold training system, including technical training, we need to bear in mind that we need coordination with Horizon, cohesion policy and education and training too. Thank you. Mr. Kostas Mavridis, 1 minute.
President, I'm not going to talk about figures right now, because we're all familiar with them. Instead, I'm going to look behind the figures. Behind the figures, there is human pain and despair, hopelessness. Cyprus is a small country, it's in a member state of the European Union and is suffering enormously from the crisis and unemployment. I believe, honourable colleagues, that we should think more about this and try to think about practical measures and call for the Commission to adopt practical measures. There are two things that we can ascertain. First of all, that the success of the Youth Guarantee Programme hinges on the opportunities within the economies of Europe to create jobs. Secondly, without the requisite measures being implemented, we won't be able to reintegrate unemployed people into the labour market, and we'll come back in a couple of years' time to talk about the same problems. The combination of the market dynamic and intervention and support, I think, could offer solutions to the problem, and I expect of the Commissioner that he provide us with tangible proposals that combine this with the Member States' opportunities to intervene. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we bring in Commissioner Andor, we've had a large number of requests to catch the eye, but be given the time constraints, I'll just take one per group, starting with Ms. Muscardini for the EPP group. Thank you, President. We are appreciative of the Youth Employment Programme. In Italy, we were one of the first to adopt this. It shouldn't, however, be a system separate unto itself. With funds setting up online platforms should involve young people, and that there should be a system of incentives and disincentives for regions depending on their efforts to generate employment. There are already discussions in our Senate regarding implementation of measures involving the public and private networks. Thank you. Mr. Tani, 1 minute. Tibor Zani. Is he not here?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, President. On my behalf, I think that we agree on many fronts. I think that we're very glad.
Just a moment, please. May I ask all colleagues who have not taken part in the debate to observe order as they enter the chamber. We are winding up an important debate, and I will therefore call for silence. Mr. Sonia, you have the floor.
So, on behalf of the incoming MEPs, let me say that over the last couple of years we were delighted to hear that this Youth Employment Guarantee Programme, which has its roots in the Social Democrats initiative, that this is going to be implemented, and we have indicated a number of occasions that we need to top up the resources available. We need to increase the age limit to 30, and we need to make sure that supervision of how the money is spent should be carried out at member state level. And I think this is extremely important, and we hope to be able to count on resources in the future. And we shouldn't be looking at the way that figures are being bandied about to muddy the waters, and we need to look at young people and the effect on them, because I think it's important for us to get rid of VAT levied on foodstuffs. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. 1 minute for Mr. Ratti.
Onorevole Starbatti.
Starbatti, not present.
President, I'm a new member of this Parliament. I'm a scientist, and I try to think in terms of cause and effect. I think that we've only heard prescriptive solutions being put forward, and such recommendations without proper underpinning are not useful. So we have to look at an analysis of the causes. Why in Germany has it been the case that we've seen a dramatic decrease in unemployment in Germany? Why is it that on the southern periphery of Europe we're seeing a dramatic increase in youth unemployment? Why has our export surplus increased? Why are we not looking at this kind of crucial issue? So all I can say is that things won't work if we don't take measures now, because we'll come back in a year's time and hold the same debate. We have to look at the competitiveness of an economy, because why are private investors not investing in a given country? But I mean, that's the kind of thing we should be looking at if we want to get rid of youth unemployment.
Honorevole Bilbao. Thank you, Ms. Bilbao Barandica. 1 minute. Thank you, President. I would like to welcome the announcement on the part of Mr. Juncker yesterday that he would raise the age of young people eligible for this programme to 30. May I also express an anxiety, however. This programme will be successful if it stays close to the realities of the labour market and provided it is well integrated. Many of the skills knowledge required to make this successful can be found in the regions. The Spanish government has made a ridiculous use of the funds intended for this programme. The national government has kept 85%, with 15% remaining for the regions, although the responsibilities are distributed in inverse proportion to that. This is a threat to the success of a European programme, and so we call for these dysfunctions to be corrected so that the programme can work properly. And so, Commissioner Andor, are you familiar with the Spanish government's programme? What do you think of the distribution of funds they have in mind, which is not in line with the diverse needs of the various regions within Spain? Our needs in the Basque Country are not being met. Katarina Konečná, 1 minute.
Otázky nezaměstnanosti mladých je jedním z klíčových.
Youth unemployment is a key issue of the present time. Before EU accession in the Czech Republic, we realized we needed to be more mature in order to become equal partners with the West. But instead of maturity, we have neoliberalism, we have unemployment, and the north of Europe has shown its true face to the south, to Spain, Portugal, Italy, where there is skyrocketing youth unemployment. The European Union can't afford a lost generation of young people. We also have to see a stop to the policy of cuts and neoliberal policy. That's why we're putting forward clear measures like proper scrutiny of working conditions. That's part of the measures that we have to resolve. We're not going to be able to deal with this by means of just one program without the money behind it. We need a holistic approach towards young people, and we shouldn't be spending money on businesses and banks. We should be spending money on young people.
Thank you. Marco Valli, 1 minute. Thank you, President. I'd like to turn to the Commissioner for a moment and ask him whether he really believes that the issue of employment can be solved only by reform. I think this process denies people the responsibility to face life with long-term projects, leaving them excluded from our society. Wealth is being concentrated in the hands of those who exploit labour.
Onorevole Korwin-Mikke.
Korwin-Mikke, 1 minute.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, introducing the first bill on minimum wage, said frankly, it is to protect the industry of the North with the competition of the cheap labor from the South. And 4 million human lost jobs. Well, it was 4 million niggers, but now we have 20 million Europeans who are the Negroes of Europe. 20 million young people are Negroes from Europe, yes. They are treating like Negroes. And we must destroy the minimum wage, and we must destroy the power of trade unions. Because the trade unions, listen to me, because the trade unions are the instruments
La
of the
invito
wealthy
a
workers and
usare
trade unions are
espressioni
against the young
consone
people.
a
I would ask you to use terminology appropriate to a chamber such as this.
Adesso la parola.
At this point, may I call for order? We are concluding an extremely important debate, and I shall now give the floor to Commissioner Andor. You have the floor, sir.
President, honourable members, first of all, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this discussion.
Allora un attimo, commissario, mi
Just a moment, Commissioner. I do apologise. Colleague.
President, forgive me, but that person used racist language. He used the word nigger. He should be censored much more strictly.
Come si chiama lui? No. Onorevole, il mio richiamo.
Honourable member, I addressed the member who used that expression. My office will look into this and take the necessary steps. Commissioner Andor, do take the floor, please.
Mr. President, honourable members, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this discussion, and especially to those who spoke first time on this subject in this House. Because the time is short and the discussion itself was quite long, I will try to be brief but also concrete. I agree with everyone who stressed that the European Union needs to do more for economic growth and job creation overall, not only focusing on the young generation but for the entire labour market. However, we have reasons, strong reasons, also to develop measures and reforms targeted to the young generation, improving school-to-work transitions in the European Union, because the young people have been disproportionately hit by the consequences of the financial and economic crisis. And as it is well known, the youth unemployment rate is more than twice as high as the overall unemployment rate in the European Union. But our starting point is that Europe indeed is quite diverse. It's also very imbalanced. There are some countries which have been performing quite well, and we have to help others learning from the good performers. This expression has been used widely in this discussion, including by Mr. Arnott. Indeed, the good examples of Austria, Germany and other countries, where there is no such great gap between the overall unemployment level and the youth unemployment rate, need to be studied and, if possible, taken over. This applies to the various forms of dual training, apprenticeship models, but also how the public employment services function in these countries. And I strongly believe that the good social dialogue, social partnership also contributes to finding the right solutions and the right ways forward. The Youth Guarantee is not a one-size-fits-all policy. The EU agreed on some key principles and parameters which can be delivered if also the financial backing is provided. But the Member States themselves are developing their own national youth guarantee schemes in close cooperation with the European Commission, and also paying attention to each other. Questions have been raised concerning specific countries, whether it is Spain or Italy, where the situation indeed is much more serious than in some other cases. The Commission pays close attention to these countries. I myself still this week go to Italy to attend the informal council, and next week once more to Spain, and these missions allow for comparing notes with the government about the progress with the implementation of the youth guarantee. This implementation does not entirely depend on the €6 billion financial instrument, because this is a top-up fund to supplement the European Social Fund resources and the national resources that also have to be used. And almost all countries are still spending
the ESF allocations of the previous period that actually ended last December. So because of the financial factor, there are no delays. In fact, those who have any kind of questions were given a good explanation of how to use these financial resources in March, which all the ministers received, and some countries take advantage of the European Investment Bank bridging finance facility to accelerate funding through youth-related measures. This is of course not sufficient if we look at the very severe imbalances inside the Eurozone. I agree with those who stress that there is indeed a link between the EMU imbalances, and that's why we have to not just monitor these imbalances through a scoreboard which includes youth unemployment and inactivity, but also continue working on an EMU reform and consider options for counter-cyclical fiscal capacity. This is what the Council later this week in an informal setting in Milan will also discuss, what options exist. The age limit has been discussed. Member States, this needs to be known, Member States are allowed to go to 30 years if they choose, so if they opt for this. However, the Commission has been encouraging all these Member States, first of all, to focus on the generation, on the cohorts under 25, introduce the measures, very important reform measures, to support, to improve school-to-work transitions, whether it is on the side of the education and training or, on the other hand, on the side of the labour market. And once this is successful under 25, obviously there should be no reason to refrain from going to a higher age bracket. This is not only a supply-side question. This is my answer to Mr. Schwab. Skills are very important. Supply-side measures are important, but the Youth Guarantee also has to be able to intervene on the side of the demand for labour and supplement the missing demand in many cases, especially at the time of the recession. The Commission has been working very closely with the Member States and also checking how the funds are used and how the reforms are prepared. It's not only a matter of personal visits, which I did to see also in pilot cases in the city of Évora or Ballymun in Ireland or Extremadura region, where there is a regional youth guarantee scheme already in Spain. We also use the European semester to assess and provide a feedback to the Member States, and we cooperate with the ILO and the OECD, which are also involved in technical advice. It is true that the Turin meeting of heads of state and government has been postponed, but the Italian presidency keeps youth employment and the youth guarantee among its priorities, and the attention of the heads of state and government remains very, very important. So the youth guarantee is a major flagship initiative. The Commission is working with the Member States and other stakeholders to implement it, but this is of course not a substitute for the right macroeconomic policies or industrial policies which will help generating economic growth and jobs in the EU. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you. Commissioner Andor. I must inform you that I've received 7 motions to wind up the debate. The debate is now closed, and as you know, the vote will be taken tomorrow at 11 a.m. We shall now move on to our voting session.
Informare l'Aula.
I should like to inform the House that pursuant to Rule 231, paragraph 4, there has been no request to put to the vote any of the corrigenda that were announced yesterday at 10 a.m. Those corrigenda are therefore deemed approved.
È la mia prima presidenza di voti e
This is the first time I will have presided over a vote, so I would ask you to bear with me.
Relazione Langen, adozione dell'euro.
On Mr. Langen's report, the adoption of the euro by Lithuania on the 1st of January 2015. We will take the vote on the proposed decision by a simple majority. Those in favour, please show. Those against? Abstentions? That's carried.
Progetto di risoluzione.
On the legislative motion, Amendment 4 will have a roll call vote, which is now open.
La votazione è chiusa.
The vote is closed. That is rejected. After paragraph 7, Amendment 1, a roll call vote. The vote is open.
Votazione chiusa. Votazione chiusa.
The vote is closed. That is rejected. Amendment number 2. Those in favour, please show. Those against? Abstentions? That's rejected. Amendment number 3. Here we have a roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. And that is rejected. Paragraph 9, Amendment number 5. Those in favour, please show. Those against? Abstentions? That's rejected. On recital A, a split vote, part 1. Those in favour, please show. Those against? Abstentions? That's carried. The second part, those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Carried. Now the final vote on the legislative resolution, this will be by a roll call vote. The vote is open.
Votazione chiusa.
The vote is closed. That is carried by 545 votes to 116.
Non c'è niente.
Votiamo la composizione
Next we will vote on the numerical strength of our interparliamentary delegations. Those in favour of the decision, please show. Those against? Abstentions? Carried. We will now take the explanations of vote.
Grazie Presidente. No, questo dopo le dichiarazioni.
Ci sono dichiarazioni di voto?
Sì, sì.
Grazie.
Ah, ma ce ne ha già. Okay.
Come sta? Tutto
bene?
bene?
Grazie.
Ha la parola per un minuto
Ottmar Karas has the floor for 1 minute.
Invito